I would like to talk about ayahuasca in this video, the vine of souls or the vine of the dead. So a bit of a different video today, sort of a trip report type video. And I'd like to talk about my recent experience with ayahuasca about 6 months ago now and some of the build up to that. So by way of explanation, to sort of link this into folklore and mythology, I often feel that being a storyteller is somewhat adjacent to to a sort of shamanistic worldview, perhaps for want of a better word. You are sometimes, when telling an old folk story and really immersing yourself in it, you sometimes enter a slightly trance-like state, and it feels like you are courting energies and entities there. You're not just telling a story. There's something else going on. And certainly historically the role of storyteller is sort of adjacent to the role of a shaman in a community. You know, in ancient Celtic society, you might say the druids and the bards fulfill a similar sort of role. They're next to each other. Anyway, perhaps that's just a little springboard as to why I'm talking about this. I've been interested in shamanism, again, for want of a better word, for a long time, and indigenous spirituality, perhaps as a way to recover something that I feel in the West we lost a very, very, very long time ago and are trying to rediscover. And for better or for worse, we need to perhaps borrow a little from indigenous communities world over where these sorts of practices have never really died out. So ayahuasca then, maybe just a quick introduction to this plant-based hallucinogen, this brew. Ayahuasca is from the Amazon rainforest. It's quite popular these days, hasn't always been, particularly in the last 10 years, I would say, maybe 20 years. Interest has exploded, particularly in the West, in this substance, you know, influences and what have you, all lauding its praises, and it is a very, very important and special substance. It's made of two things. It's made of a plant containing dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which you can extract and just smoke on its own. Very different experience. A plant containing tryptamine, normally chacruna, but it can be other plants, and ayahuasca proper, the vine of souls, Banisteriopsis carpi, which is the root bark of a vine that grows in the Amazon. And these two plants combined and boiled up with a certain process creates a brew called ayahuasca, which is the name for the Banisteriopsis carpi. One element of these plants is visionary. It contains tryptamines. It's got the hallucinogenic element. The other element of this plant contains, well, it allows the plant to be the hallucinogenic aspect of the plant to be ingested properly. So scientifically, biologically, that's its purpose in the brew. It allows those enzymes to be properly absorbed by the body to give you the experience when taken orally. But according to various indigenous ways of thinking, the Banisteriopsis carpi vine has a very important spiritual role. It kind of gives the guidance to the visions. It also just slows everything down so you can have time to focus on the visionary aspects. I don't know if any of you have ever smoked dimethyltryptamine when it's been extracted, but there's just, it's strongly visual, very short lasting, but sometimes you can't really make sense of any of the sometimes utter nonsense that happens to you, and it can be quite alarming. The vine just slows everything down, and also, it is said, gives an intelligence to it, a kindness to it that allows you to integrate any lessons. I'm sure a lot of you know this already. I'm just saying this for anyone that doesn't. So, my very first experience with ayahuasca was long, long ago, when I was 18 years old, before the sort of ayahuasca craze exploded. I was volunteering in the Amazon with a rainforest charity, working with an indigenous community, and I just became aware of this worldview and this plant-based hallucinogen, this brew. through other backpackers. I think it was a book called DNA and the Origins of Knowledge by Jeremy Narby. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. It's a cult classic. I saw that in a backpackers lodge and I was like, this is interesting, flicking through that. So long story short, the charity I was working with offered a ayahuasca experience with a shaman from a nearby community, an ayahuasquero, a vegetalista, maybe to use a more culturally appropriate word. The visions were very light, as I remember. They probably went very, very light on us. I just remember my imagination having a lot more colour and seeing kind of the creation of the world actually projected like a movie on the hut on the ceiling of the hut above me. So it was a fairly mild experience, that one, when I was sort of 18 years old and didn't know much about shamanism or anything like that. I wasn't, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, really. But that started a lifelong interest in different forms of shamanism worldwide. That has continued with me to this day. And it's sort of probably played a part in why I do what I do today, why I'm a storyteller. It's a way of slightly engaging with that worldview. Now let's get to the meat of this video, and this is 2 ayahuasca experiences I've had. One was last year, about 6 months ago, that was a very, very, very visionary one, probably the most visionary I've had. The other one was with the same group, facilitated by the same group about 10 years previously, so coming up to 10 years ago now. Can't give any details about this group just to protect their identity and out of respect to them. Assume it was all safe and all legal and was connected to an indigenous tradition. There's a lot of charlatans out there these days, so if you're interested in this, just be really, really careful and don't ask me for advice. So I just want to talk a little bit about this very first experience 10 years ago, because it feeds into this next one that happened about 6 months ago. It wasn't a hugely visionary experience, but it was very, very healing for me. There was a lot of purging for me. I vomited a lot of neon snakes and centipedes. Maybe this is an experience some of you can relate to, just purging, and then in the bucket seeing all these little worms just wriggling away. Quite a common experience, seeing aspects of jungle flora and fauna in ayahuasca visions, even if you take it out of the Amazon. I have seen anacondas in Wales. I have seen jaguars in Amsterdam. Other visionary aspects of that vision 10 years ago, that trip, were based around these shamans themselves. I said as soon as they put their gear on, they assumed slightly different form, but in the vision, they and their helpers, they assumed it was, they suddenly transformed into what I can only describe as Maya or Aztec or Inca religious iconography that you might see carved on a temple in a jungle somewhere. Their faces suddenly seemed, I was very aware of their profiles that looked, very indigenous, strong nose. Behind them, stretching behind them, were more extreme visions of what looked like indigenous gods, jaguar-headed or eagle-headed, stretching out behind them. And it was when they were doing their healings and or sucking out some darkness from a participant, and you could really see this blackness going in and then going out the back of their head, and you could see their true forms. It was like all their ancestors, this whole ancestral tradition standing behind them, literally in the form of some South American deity I did not know the name of, but you could see it. It looked like statues behind them. Really strong visual experience. The other strong visual element of that trip 10 years ago was aliens. Loads of aliens, loads of UFOs. I've talked about UFOs and aliens on this channel before. I don't think aliens are extraterrestrials from another planet in this physical universe. I think that idea is really silly, that they would fly over here in their silly little spaceships. I think rather than extraterrestrial, a better term is probably interdimensional. These are non-material beings that we might even put in the same category as elves or fairies or something like that. And maybe they just manifest in this form because it's culturally appropriate to us. I don't know. These are quite common theories. But there's no bones about it. These were grey aliens like you see in popular culture since the 1960s that were appearing in my vision. You might say that I had just watched, I don't know, The X-Files or some film and it bled into my vision, but no, every single participant of about 60 of us in that group saw aliens in that vision. My friend who I went to this retreat with, she said, I just wanted to get off the spaceship. Now, the room, the ceremony room, was round, and it did very much for both of us turn into a fucking spaceship. It had the windows, which were square before, became round, you know, like portholes of a spaceship. This will be reflected in my experience 6 months ago as well, by the way. Also, the doors of the ceremony room, sometimes people were going in and out, maybe to get some air or to purge or something like that, and they did this. So whenever someone came through, they came through, and then when someone went out again, they would. There were portals, liquid portals, and outside the sort of liquid portal windows of the spaceship was outer space, and it was whizzing by in many colours. I was flying through space and seeing colours, and there was the presence of grey aliens around in the visions. Like I said, we didn't get together and say, let's see some aliens. We all saw aliens. Now, why did we see aliens? Here is an interest, you know, if you guys are interested, is this just subjective experience, or is there some shared collective unconscious or shared psychic experience? I don't know, you know, you're welcome to your own metaphysics, but this happened in this experience 10 years ago. So when everyone was done and sort of comparing alien experiences, you saw the aliens as well. What, you on the spaceship? Yeah, I just wanted to get off the spaceship. One of the Western shamans told us that she was present with the brewing of this particular brew, brew of ayahuasca we were drinking. And it was brewed by a master brewer. This gentleman that this group had got this brew off was one of these master brewers. And he always has a little drink of his medicine when he's making his brew. Not all brewers do that. But he's widely renowned as one of the master brewers of that region of the Amazon. And he said to the facilitator of this group, and she passed on this anecdote to us, but he said when he was making this particular brew we were drinking, the mothership descended and the greys came out and put their hands in the brew. So as he was drinking it, he sort of witnessed that. She told us that after we had all related our strongly UFO-based visions. So, you know, this one was blessed by the aliens. Make of that what you will. But I think it's so interesting that UFO imagery and rainforest imagery often cohabit in ayahuasca visions in indigenous communities as well. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Pablo Amaringo. He's an ayahuasca artist and a shaman himself. But if you look at his beautiful paintings of his visions among the images of shamans and anacondas and mermaids and whatever other maybe more typical ayahuasca symbology are often aliens and spaceships and cities in the sky. It's not just me, that's all I'm saying. So the reason why I talk about that experience 10 years ago, which wasn't actually hugely visionary for me, even with all the aliens, was because this experience I had 6 months ago now was with the same group, without the indigenous shamans, but the rest of the group was broadly similar. And the potion was the same. It was the same vintage of ayahuasca brew. I had no idea that you could store a brew of ayahuasca that long, but apparently you can. And that, 10 years ago, was the very first crop of that vintage. And when I had this ceremony 6 months ago, it was the very last drop of that vintage. So I was there at the beginning and the end of that alien-blessed vintage. So this experience of mine, this ayahuasca experience 6 months ago, obviously wasn't my first. I've had a few, but this was probably one of the most significant. I went with Tamsin, my partner. We followed the dieta, as you do. No alcohol, no, certain kinds of foods are prohibited. spending time away from screens, a lot of time just mentally preparing. We went to the location for the ceremony and we took this brew. So this was very much a experience, a vision of two halves. The first half wasn't particularly visionary. I took the medicine. It was the very bottom of that vintage, like I'd said, and it was viscous. And ayahuasca is not really the most delicious of substances. It's pretty bitter, but I can normally handle it. But this was particularly, had to really meditate on that, not to instantly heave. But I kept it down. Now, a lot of squirming followed. If any of you have taken hallucinogenics, I'm sure you'll be familiar that there's a certain amount of ego, there's a certain amount of resistance early on, a little bit of kaleidoscopic fluttering, visionary fluttering, but a lot of squirming, a lot of fighting, a lot of this sort of talk, a lot of these people just charlatans. I shouldn't have come here. Oh, this was a bad idea. Or conversely, where are my visions? Why is nothing happening? Show me my visions. Or can we just go? Can this just be over? I want to go home now. I'm bored. This is boring. Frankly, this is boring. I just want to go home. Can this just be over and I'll go home? All this kind of thing. This is my advice to you if you're ever having a bit of resistance. Just sit up and face it, and open-hearted with compassion and braveness, and just root yourself in the present moment, and just face up to the experience and accept it as it comes. As soon as I did that, something kind of released, and I started getting visions, but not strong visual ones, really. It was more I was being taken back through a lot of my past, through a lot of my teenage years, when maybe I was just being shown things I had done that were maybe unkind. Like one particular example, when I was sort of 16, me and a bunch of mates snuck off to do some magic mushrooms and excluded another friend who was maybe on the outskirts of our group. We excluded him because we didn't have enough. But really, it's just because we were being unkind, basically. And I'd never thought about this moment. I'd completely forgotten it. And I was just shown that, and I was said, this was unkind. You hurt that person's feelings. And I was taken through a few other things like that, including in my present life. I lost my mum 3 years ago, and obviously my dad and my brother have been going through hard times. And I realised in that time I've sometimes been not as patient as I could be with my dad and brother. And to be fair, often they can sometimes be selfish individuals. We all can. And I was just told, just be a little bit more patient. They've lost their mum and wife as well. It's not just you. Just be a little bit more patient and a little bit more kind. And that came to me in a voice that was not my own. And in my experience, that was the voice of ayahuasca. If any of you have taken this medicine before, you'll know that she does, and she is female, she does speak to you. Others, depending on your conditioning, will say, well, maybe that was just your own, intuition or your own inner voice. You're welcome to your own views and opinions, but it sounded like a voice that was not my own in my head. I do get those voices quite a lot just because of my neurology, but this one felt different. It was the voice of Mama Ayahuasca, and she said, just be a little bit less selfish and be a little bit more kind. And as that just kept coming, and as it did, a bee appeared in my vision. My eyes were kind of half open, so I was still seeing the room around me. Stuff was slightly growing in it, but it was more or less the same. But a bee kind of buzzed in and just landed there on my hand, and it was glowing. It was a kind of golden, luminous, glowing bee. Be a little less selfish and a little more kind. And I was like, bee, I get you. It's a pun. I didn't know ayahuasca did puns, but she does. And it just landed there. And as soon as I went, got it. That's pretty funny. Then it buzzed off. So that was my first vision of the evening in the first half, the first act of this experience. I might as well say as well, I will make another video about this, about bees, the folklore of bees. But I had an experience a few months prior to this on Dartmoor in front of a very old cairn on Dartmoor, kind of mound of stones, usually a grave marker associated with the ancestors. And I was in prayer. I was speaking a prayer to my ancestors. And at that moment, I was subsumed in a swarm of bees that I took to be a direct message from spirit. Subsumed in a swarm of bees. They were all over my skin and then they swarmed away. It was kind of a terrifying, quite grounding experience. But one of my intentions, always important to set intentions for a visionary experience like this. One of my intentions was, what was the bees all about? And then a bee had appeared in my vision. And I was like, so, okay, maybe part of that ancestor thing. Maybe this is the ancestors, bees, ancestors, just telling me to, just be a bit less selfish. That's your job, and be a bit more kind. That was it. That was all I needed from the experience at that point, and I just said thank you. Just thank you so much. That's all I needed. If I end this experience now, I'll take it. I have gratitude for that. You've shown me the meaning of the bees. I will leave this experience just being a bit less selfish and a bit more kind. When I'd done that, the visions actually opened up a bit in this first act, and there was an Icaro, a song being sang. Beautiful, beautiful song. Icaros are Amazonian chants that have been passed on from generation to generation. It's impossible to know how old they are, but indigenous communities themselves, some of them say that they are thousands of years old and were taught to them by the spirits themselves in ayahuasca journeys, or by the spirit of Mama Ayahuasca. So this beautiful Icaro, this beautiful song, was being sung by the musicians. This group has musicians to kind of guide you through the experience. And it was beautiful. And as they were singing this song, kind of in time and tune with it, I saw a ship, a flying ship, a sky ship, a spirit vessel. It had wings and was it was slightly reminiscent of a Viking longship, slightly reminiscent of maybe a Chinese or Arabian ship with those sort of fan-shaped sails. But more than anything, it was like a Greek trireme. I think it had an eye on it and oars. But attached to it were many threads, like silken threads, like spider webs, and there were beings, sort of humanoid, angelic, jellyfish-like beings floating alongside the ship, and some of them were attached to these cords attached to the ship. Some of them were just sort of free floating, and they were kind of human and doing sort of contemporary dance in space, in deep space, alongside this flying vessel, which was sort of hovering over the surface of what looked like a planet or maybe a moon. It was quite pale, and there was another one kind of up there somewhere. There were planets and stars around, and it was like the ship was either docking in, coming into land on this planet, or had come from that planet and was in space getting ready to go into wide, deep outer space. That's what it felt like. And as she was singing these songs, these spirits were kind of coming in and guiding this vessel and coming in to kind of land on this sky ship, this soul vessel. I was very clear that's what it was. It was a ship of spirits. Interestingly, after that Icaro ended and the vision kind of faded, the head shaman that was facilitating this group told us that this Icaro was taught to her by a Peruvian shaman, indigenous, that was taught to them by another, and that this was a spirit guide song. And if we are feeling lost in this vision, just concentrate on the Icaro and it will guide you back. And that's very much what this vision of the ship was to me. So that was pretty interesting. So that was the first act, the first half of this ayahuasca experience. Things got a little bit, more after this, but I was happy with that. I'd had this, I've been given this message just about my own growth and self-healing. That was one of my intentions. I had received this really beautiful vision of this flying ship. I had gratitude for the experience. Now for the second half of this experience. I should say there's a few different ways of doing ayahuasca retreats. Some of them are over quite a few days, and you gradually ease into it with a dose getting larger and larger and larger. Other traditions, other Amazonian traditions are sort of, going hard and strong. You're done in a few hours and you turn the notch up to 11. Both have their merits, and neither one is better than the other, I would say. But the group I was in was the latter tradition. You go in strong and hard, and yeah, you have it done with. Even in that tradition, though, you normally have two, maybe 1 cup or 2 cups. You have a second dose later on, sometimes. So in this experience, I'd had what I needed, and I felt I didn't need a second dose. I felt that Mama Ayahuasca had given me the lesson I needed, and I didn't need another. But this gradually changed. And I thought to myself, actually, maybe this is just fear talking, and I'm here. And then I received a kind of hum or something that said maybe I should actually have another cup. And just as I kind of thought that, one of the sort of assistant shamans kind of pulled me up. It's almost the situation it was an interesting synchronicity. But there I was, and I thought, well, I'm here now. So I drank this down. Oh, it was viscous and bitter. And I didn't keep it down. I just instantly purged it, and I thought, damn, what a waste. I'm so sorry. That was very precious 10-year-old vintage that I just wasted. I didn't say that, I just thought it. I'll be honest, a bit of me was relieved. I was like, right, well, I've done enough squirming and wriggling around on a mat today. Maybe that's fine. Maybe I didn't need it. And I thought I'd vommed up the medicine, so I wasn't going to get any visions. How wrong I was. Not long later, and a bit of this could have been the first dose, I suppose, but a full-on kaleidoscope of visions came thick and fast upon me. So I've categorized in my little journal. I've categorized the visions, because sometimes I like doing that just to look at later. Really important to write these visions down if you're going to do an ayahuasca experience. Otherwise, you will forget them. So the first category of visions, and I kept returning to this imagery, was the sky ships, not the spirit ship I saw in the first act, not the kind of almost classical style Tyrene winged ship with the spirits that was quite angelic and bathed in white light. It wasn't that. It was a different kind of flying ship. It was brass, and it was industrial. It was like it had been designed by steampunk dwarves. It had portholes, ding, 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 with rivets in them. My first sense was that I was in the control room of this brass spaceship. It was a spaceship, but different from the UFOs of my vision 10 years prior. This was a different thing. Like I say, it was kind of dwarven and industrial. It was steampunk. Steampunk would be the best way to describe it. And I was in the control room, and there was circuitry kind of running around, and synapses. It was like a motherboard of a computer chip. So it was a little bit digital, but also analog at the same time. And I kept being in this mothership, and I couldn't get a full sense of the full perspective of it. It was like it was docked. It was like a small vessel shaped like a brass fish inside a mothership that was also inside a cave. And there were also little polyps of mushrooms that were a bit like that were like synapses, or mushroom polyps, or also circuitry. They were like all of these things, and I kept seeing these things growing across the brass surface of the hull of this ship that I kept seeing from certain close-up perspectives, but I could very rarely get a sense of the whole thing. And because I kept coming back to this space, I got a sense that I was meant to be doing something here, but I didn't know what it was. And at a later point in the vision, when I purged quite strongly, actually, sometimes with ayahuasca, when you purge, the visions come on quite thick. So at one point when I purged, suddenly I was flying through space on this fish-shaped brass vessel. And like warp speed, the galaxies were flying past me, and I was going, "Whoa! Oh right, it works then." It was meant to fly around, but I felt like for most of the vision, I was docked in the mothership, and I didn't know the controls, man. This space was also shared with the next vision, goblins. So many goblins. I've talked about this aspect of this ayahuasca trip on this channel before. It's about goblins, so I'll put a link to that video all about goblins. But Goblins there were so many goblins in this ayahuasca vision, so many of them. Goblins is the word I'm using. You might want to say, I don't know, imps or troglodytes or something like that. They were subterranean. They were silly. They weren't hostile, but they were. Sometimes they were trying to scare me or make me laugh or get a rise out of me. They were nearby. They were associated with the mushrooms and subterranean caverns. Sometimes I feel like they were maybe the engineers of the great brass control room and sky ships. They were kind of in the background there. It's like they didn't design it, but they were sort of there, like lesser entities. I felt they were terrestrial or part of the physical biology of life on Earth, or even my or our bodies. Goblins, they're just always there. And as soon as my visionary eye became aware of them, they suddenly became aware of me and got very excited, as if they were like, "Oi, he can see us! Oi, oi, we're over here!" And they started doing weird stuff like picking their nose or picking their bums or going like, "Ah," or like that, or just trying to get a rise out of me or trying to frighten me or something like that. They were very silly, and sometimes they were turning into mushrooms or back from mushrooms into goblins again. But these guys kept appearing, and I was always really happy to see them because they felt like they were of the layers of psychic or spiritual or non-material beings. They felt like they were the layer close to terrestriality. They were the layer close to biology. It's like they're always here among us, you know. So that was the goblins, and they just kept making me laugh. I had a real good time with the goblins, and Tamsin said afterwards that she, in her state next to me, just kept hearing me say, "Silly goblins," and just giggling to myself. And I did keep saying aloud. I kept hearing my own voice saying, "Silly goblins," because they were just so fun, man. So that was the goblins, and like I said, they were sometimes in the same vicinity as the brass sky ships, these underground caverns with mushrooms growing. The third set of visions, or the third type of visionary entity I saw, were the what I've termed the Death's Head tendrils. Something I've never seen before in any vision. But these were eerie, aloof, and strange. So at some point during this vision, during this whole ayahuasca experience, it became very clear that the room I was in and my physical world was this side of a veil, a kind of spiritual veil or curtain. And after a while, this veil, which our reality seems to be projected onto, became transparent, and I could see what was the other side of the veil. It was a shadowy, strange realm where I couldn't quite make everything out, and everything was slightly translucent, so I could still see this physical world around me, which was the inside of a darkened room with lots of people on mats vomiting. But that was just sort of a very translucent layer projected on this sort of bubble, and I could see through that and see the source of things, which was this great, almost great black, dark, pulsating orb, which was either, I don't know, God or the spirit world, or the numinous, some interpoint between the other world and this world, or maybe it was the spirit of Mama Ayahuasca herself. But it was this barely visible black planet all the way up there, the other side of the veil, and out of it was pouring these tendrils, these snakes. They were like dragons. They were like Chinese dragons or serpents or tentacles or probes, and they were just pouring like that out of this great mass, this great dark planet, the other side of the veil, pouring towards me. And they were moving really slowly and gracefully through the sky, above the sky, if that makes sense. And let me describe these things. Their heads were the heads of dead horses. So they had horses' skulls or something else like that, maybe ram skulls, but I think horses. You could see their teeth and their eye sockets, skeletal horse heads, and their bodies were the vertebra of a horse's back, or a snake or snake's vertebra. So you could see all the vertebrae, and the horse's death's head, and the rear end attached to that great black planet up there. And the horses' heads were coming down, reaching towards me, or just gracefully arcing in the sky above me. They also had black coming out of the vertebrae was black, either black snakes or fur or maybe growth, maybe vines, and it was black and shiny and kind of fluttering and doing that windlessly. Also coming out of their necks were these probes. Each one were these tendrils, each one ending in either a probe or an eyeball. Sort of maybe 6 to 8 of them on each horse head, and all of these things were kind of almost soaring gracefully high above me in time with the icaros that were being sang. But one of them had taken an interest in me, and it was coming down, and it had actually pierced this veil and come into the room and was coming towards me and was just sort of, it was checking me out with its probes. I think was it healing me or was it investigating me? I don't know. It was doing something, but it was in the fucking room, right? And it was there, I was like, what the hell is these things? And it was like they were the emissaries from spirit. They felt eerie and strange. The goblins, by comparison, felt really like relatable, but these things were weird beyond weird, and they were aloof, and they were from a different dimension entirely. But they were serene, and I felt they were not a threat. I felt they were here to do good, even though they were strange. Um, and they were clearly dead. Like there was something about death attached to them. Like, yeah, it felt like a sense of. It felt like the energy was, we've always been here. We've always been here. We've always been here. And you are in that form, but this is deep and rich and strange, and there's things you just don't understand. And we come from that place, and we're coming to just check you out. That was what it felt like. So that was probably the richest, deepest, and strangest part of this experience. There was also more kind of fun and eye-popping visionary visuals. Cities, the civilizations. So this is vision number 4 was, and this I think is quite a common ayahuasca vision. It was a civilization, a city-state blossoming in a sped up time lapse before my eyes. So I think this was maybe after some more purging. This vision just exploded in front of me, and it was an arid desert climb. I saw it absolutely clearly. 2020 crystal clear vision, like a high definition film. It filled my whole vision. I couldn't see the room anymore. I was just there, and it was a pyramid that started small but then grew. But as the pyramid grew in size, my perspectives, I zoomed out. So the pyramid always stayed the same size, but the landscape just spread out, and all this city spread out of square mud brick houses, like you would imagine a Mesopotamian city, like Babylon or the city of Ur or somewhere like that. It was like that, or maybe ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. That was sort of the place I was, and you could see the grid layout. You could see the civilization growing before my eyes. I don't know if it was a real world civilization or a civilization on another planet. I think on another planet, but it looked like a Mesopotamian civilization, in the Fertile Crescent, at the dawn of human civilization. And I saw that just expand before me. So that was that was interesting. I tried to fly down, like a lucid dream, and look in some of the houses. But whenever I tried to do so, I was like, "Nah, you're not seeing this in detail." And I went back to the big. So and I kept trying to see. I kept trying to see. I want to see what this is. I want to see if this is an earthbound civilization or if this is a terrestrial one. That was really cool. I've never had such an interactive, that felt like a lucid dream, but with lucid dreams, they're not always 20/20 vision. And with lucid dreams, I'm always bloody waking up. Yeah, so the last vision was the vision of the black fox. So this was interesting, and this was towards the end of the experience. So I've mentioned the bee that came earlier. It became clear to me throughout this vision, whenever I was thinking of my mum or members of my family that have passed on, the bees would appear again. And it became quite clear to me in the vision that these were my ancestors. These were spirits of the dead that had passed over. And then I said, what about mum? Where's mum? Where are you, mum? Show yourself. And in that moment when I did that, a red fox crossed my vision. Mum was a redhead. Crossed my vision and just ate out of my hand, actually, and it was glowing red fox, glowing in this kind of dark forest at the edge of my vision. Ate out of my hand and then went, and then another fox went running the other way, and another fox went running the other way, And I was like, okay, cool. Is that my mum? Is that my spirit guide, for want of a better word? Um, so these four foxes going in different directions, and then this is weird. A black fox, and I knew it was huge. I knew I could see like a small village in my visionary state, just kind of down there, and this fox, dwarfed the village. And at one point, the fox had blue eyes, giant black fox with blue eyes. And that fox stayed with me for the rest of the experience. And we got up and did some dancing, real sense of joy and community flowing through me. And this fox was just there. Sometimes it was small and was running around my feet, and there was a bee on my shoulder. So a bee and a fox, a bee on my shoulder. I was like, "Hello, mate." You really see it in my actual vision. I didn't have my eyes closed. It was there in the room with me, and so was this fox. Really amazing how the visionary world of ayahuasca, sometimes its eyes closed, but sometimes elements just pop in this, consensual reality as well. Integrated virtual reality, I guess you could say. Anyway, that's all I've got time for, my friends. Thank you very much. Goodbye. If you're wondering where I am, by the way, I'm actually in Italy. I'm at a gathering of druids with the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids in Italy. So thank you very much. You know who you are, for inviting me to come and do some storytelling. Beautiful, isn't it? Anyway, I'll be back in Wiltshire next time. See you, friends. Bye now. Hello, my friends. Here I am back in Wiltshire. I just want to tag on a little bit on the end of this video, something I forgot to mention that I feel is quite important, and just to bring this back to folklore and mythology and storytelling. Towards the end of that experience, when it was feeling quite interactive, when there was quite a bit of interplay, I felt that I could pose a question, and the vine, the spirit of ayahuasca, or my own subconscious, however you like to frame it, would respond very visually. If I wanted to go and explore those ancient civilizations again, boom, there they would be. And at one point, I just posed a question. It was sort of one of my intentions with this. It was, as a storyteller, what story should I tell? What story do I need to tell? What story do I need? What story does the world need to hear? What story do I need to connect with? And as soon as I posed that question, I was on board one of those flying ships again, but more of a wooden one rather than one of the brass steampunk ones, going over the treetops and then down underneath a mountain in those caverns again. And it was very rich, and there were an assortment of goblins and trolls and elves and various subterranean things. And I suddenly realized I was more or less in the Hall of the Mountain King. This is a concept from many Norwegian fairy tales and Norse folk tales. Underneath the mountains, there's a hall of dwarven and troll kings. You can see where Tolkien got a lot of these ideas from. So I asked this question, and then boom, there I was under the mountain. And I suddenly realized that all these trolls and goblins, again, were ancestors, a bit like the bees again, but these were ancestor spirits, maybe. And then the story made itself apparent, and it said, just almost written in gold letters on the ceiling above me, it said, "The Grateful Dead." So these subterranean diminutive entities were the Grateful Dead. So that was really interesting. There's an interesting insight. Maybe all the dead become the mythic beings that populate our mythology and the darker recesses of our subconscious. After the vision, I realised that this was sort of maybe three folk tales rolled into one. One was the Grateful Dead, quite a well-known folk tale. One was the Hall of the Mountain King, which is a few different Norse fairy tales about successive sort of mountain kingdoms. And the other one, particularly the flying ship aspect and the companions I had with me. I had multiple companions of various skills, and they were very strange. The other one was called The Fool of the World and the Flying Ship. So that, for me, is just an interesting way to segue the ayahuasca experience with what I do as a storyteller, and I do feel these are connected realities. So, my friends, as a means to end this video, if you would like to hear that story, The Fool of the World and the Flying Ship, also called The Ash Lad and the Good Helpers, I'll put it right here. Thank you very much, my friends. I'll see you next time.